They laughed when Ethan Cole handed over his last $100 for a rusted, barely running car that looked like it belonged in a scrapyard. The dealer smirked. The man behind him snorted loud enough to turn heads. A woman in a yellow vest covered her mouth and said something to the person beside her. Her words carried, "Can you believe that?" Ethan didn't react. He just crouched down beside the hood, studied the front grille for a moment longer than anyone expected, and stood back up. His daughter, Lily, was 6 years old and standing 3 feet away, holding the strap of her backpack with both hands. She had her father's quiet in her. She didn't flinch. She just looked at the people laughing, then looked back at her dad. She reached out and took his hand. 3 days later, a convoy of black SUVs rolled slowly down their street. A man stepped out, older, pale under the afternoon sun. He was holding a photograph, and his hands weren't entirely steady. He looked at the car sitting in the driveway. He looked at the photograph. Then he looked up. Nobody laughed. Ethan Cole woke at 5:15 every morning without an alarm. He'd done it for 11 years since his first shift at Precision Motor Works, where they docked pay if you arrived after 5:30. He'd left that job 9 years ago. The habit stayed. He lay still for a moment, staring at the ceiling of the small bedroom. The paint near the window was peeling in one corner. He'd meant to fix it before winter. That was 2 winters ago. He got up quietly, pulled on a gray t-shirt and work pants, and went to check on Lily. She was asleep on her side, one arm around a stuffed elephant named Gerald. Gerald had lost an eye somewhere around Lily's 4th birthday, and she had refused every replacement Ethan offered. "He just sees with his heart now, Daddy." He hadn't argued. He stood in her doorway for a few seconds, then went to the kitchen. The garage sat off the back of the house, connected by a side door that groaned when it opened. Ethan had learned to open it slowly. He'd also learned to avoid the 3rd floorboard in the hall, the burner on the left side of the stove that ran hot, and every other quiet compromise that came with renting a house built in 1973. The garage itself was small room for one vehicle and a workbench along the left wall. Tools hung on pegboard, organized by size. Not obsessively, just practically. A man who can't find his tools wastes time, and time was the one thing Ethan had learned not to waste. He had a 2004 pickup truck he'd rebuilt from a salvage auction 3 years ago. It ran. That was about the most generous thing you could say about it. The heater worked in patches, the passenger window didn't roll down all the way. But it moved, and it passed inspection. And it got Lily to school and Ethan to the 3 houses he serviced on rotating contract oil changes. Brake jobs, basic maintenance for people who didn't want to pay dealer rates. It was a living. Barely, after his wife, Sandra, died leukemia, 27 months from diagnosis to end. Ethan had scaled back. He'd been working for a regional fleet maintenance company, decent salary, benefits, weekends mostly free. After she was gone, he couldn't do the hours anymore. Lily needed someone. He became that someone. He didn't talk about Sandra much. Not because it hurt, though it did, but because some things didn't need to be turned into words to be true. He kept her photo on the mantle in the living room, a small one, in a plain frame. She was laughing in it, head tilted back. He had taken the picture at a county fair the summer before the diagnosis. Some mornings, walking past it, he'd pause for just a second, then he'd keep moving. The contract work paid the rent and not much more. The truck nickeled him every few months. He'd racked up a small debt to his landlord back rent from the month after Sandra's last round of treatment wiped out their savings, and a slightly larger one on a credit card he used only for Lily's school supplies and the rare emergency. He wasn't drowning. He was paddling. There's a difference, though from the outside it can look the same. Lily knew more than he thought she did. Kids that age absorb everything. She'd stopped asking for things at the store the way she used to. She'd started eating her dinners completely, even when it was just rice and whatever he could stretch with it. She'd told her first-grade teacher that her dad was very good at fixing things, which her teacher had relayed to Ethan at pickup with a small smile. He'd driven home quietly after that. Before the fleet job, before the marriage, before everything, Ethan had spent 4 years doing something else, something he didn't bring up at the school pickup line or mention when neighbors asked what he did. He'd worked in the historical preservation division of a specialty auction house. Specifically, he authenticated vintage and prototype automobiles. It was a strange job for a 23-year-old from rural Ohio. He'd fallen into it sideways, a mechanic's apprenticeship that connected to a collector who needed someone with hands and eyes and patience. Ethan had all 3. He spent 4 years learning to read a vehicle the way a scholar reads a manuscript. The wear patterns, the assembly marks, The small deviations that separated a production model from something that had never been meant for any showroom. He left when the work started pulling him away for months at a time, when Sandra got serious. When the idea of a real life, a grounded one, with people who counted on him became more real than the work. He didn't regret leaving, but he never forgot what he'd learned. Some knowledge doesn't go away, it just waits. The notice appeared on a community board at the hardware store. County impound liquidation all vehicles as is Saturday 8 a.m. Ethan saw it on a Thursday morning when he was picking up brake fluid. He read it twice, then went home and looked at his bank balance. He had $112 until his next contract payment, due in 11 days. Rent was current. Lily's lunch account at school had 2 weeks left. The credit card had a small buffer, $100. That was the number he gave himself. He took Lily with him Saturday morning because his neighbor, a retired schoolteacher named Helen, who watched Lily when necessary, had a doctor's appointment. Lily wore her purple rain jacket even though it wasn't raining. She decided it was her lucky jacket. The salvage lot was on the east side of the county, past the highway exchange. A flat gravel lot with maybe 40 vehicles arranged in rough rows. Half of them were obvious write-offs, crumpled, missing doors, stripped. A few were older trucks that might have life left in them. A crowd of about 30 people moved through the rows, some with clipboards, some with phones out taking pictures. The dealer running the event was a man named Dale Pruitt. Broad, sun-weathered, the kind of man who made small talk into a competitive sport. He had a folding table near the entrance with printed vehicle sheets and a cash box. Ethan walked the rows with Lily. He wasn't looking for anything in particular. He was looking with the kind of attention that doesn't have an agenda, just open, patient, taking things in. He'd been trained to look that way. You don't search for what you expect to find. You let what's there show itself. They were near the back of the lot when he stopped. The car was partially blocked by a crushed minivan. It took a moment to even identify it as a car. The rust was advanced, the body panels mottled with brown and dark gray, the original paint almost entirely gone. It sat low on flat tires. The windshield had a crack running from the lower left corner to the upper right like a signature. Most people had walked past it without stopping. A few had glanced and kept going. Ethan stopped. He looked at the front, then the side. Then he walked around the back slowly. There was something about the roofline. Something about the way the rear quarter panels met the trunk. He had seen that shape before, not in person in documentation, in a photograph in a binder he'd studied during his second year at the auction house. "What is it?" Lily asked, looking up at the car. "I don't know yet," Ethan said, which was the truth. He crouched down beside the passenger door. The handle was gone. He looked through the cracked window at the dashboard. The instrumentation was wrong for what the body suggested. It wasn't wrong like damaged, wrong like different, modified, or original to a version that hadn't reached standard production. He stood up and walked to the front, leaned down and looked at the bottom edge of the grille. The badge was gone, no surprise there, those went missing quickly on abandoned vehicles. But there, just to the right of where the badge would have sat, was a small stamped mark in the metal. Not a VIN, something different. A production code. He had seen that kind of stamping once before. His breath came out slow and measured. Bo Cha Kung. Lily asked the Vietnamese habit Sandra had introduced early, the private language they kept between the three of them, now between two. "Are you sure, Daddy?" Ethan looked at the stamp one more time. He straightened up. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I'm sure." He found Dale Pruitt at the table. "The brown one in the back," Ethan said. "The sedan with the cracked windshield. That thing?" Dale looked up. $100. "Take it or leave it. Honestly, I'd rather you leave it. Less paperwork for me." A few people nearby heard. Someone laughed. Ethan paid in cash. 520s. Word moved through the lot the way it does in small crowds, fast and slightly exaggerated by the time it arrived. By the time Ethan had the receipt in his hand, 6 or 7 people had drifted over to see what someone had actually paid money for. Dale Pruitt, energized by the audience, decided to perform. "Folks, we've got ourselves a buyer," he announced, gesturing toward the car. $100. For that, he waved at the rusted sedan the way a game show host reveals a bad prize. "Now I've sold some junk in my time." But, laughter. Genuine laughter from the crowd. A man in a John Deere cap shook his head and grinned. "What are you going to do with that? Put it in a garden?" More laughter. A younger guy raised his phone. "Hold on, I gotta get this." Lily was standing beside Ethan. She had pulled the hood of her purple jacket up. Her face was in shadow. Dale walked over to the car and patted the roof. Rust flaked off. He made a show of looking at his hand. "Sir, I want you to know, and I say this with respect, that this vehicle is worth approximately nothing. The engine's probably seized, the frame might be compromised, and I think something died in the back seat. What is it you're planning to do with this?" Ethan had the receipt folded in his shirt pocket. He looked at Dale for a moment without speaking. Then he looked at the car. "Drive it," he said. Bigger laughter. Dale spread his hands to the crowd like a circus announcer. "Drive it. He's going to drive it, everyone." The man with the phone swept it back and forth across the scene, the laughing crowd, the rusted car, Ethan standing quietly beside it. Ethan glanced down at Lily. She had taken the hood of her jacket down. She was looking at the people laughing. Not with anger, she was 6, and there was something more complicated in her face than anger, something that looked like she was deciding something about these people and filing it away. Then she looked up at her father. She slipped her hand into his. He squeezed once. "I'll need it towed," Ethan told Dale. His voice was even and clean, not angry, not embarrassed, just practical. Dale blinked, momentarily thrown by the lack of reaction. "Yeah, okay. We've got a guy." The tow truck arrived 40 minutes later. The operator, a quiet man named Ray, hooked up the sedan without comment. He had the expression of someone who'd towed things far stranger and had stopped having opinions. As the car was winched onto the flatbed, the man with the phone zoomed in. A couple of people watched with arms crossed, grinning. Lily watched too. Then she looked at her dad. "They don't see it," she said quietly. It wasn't a question. Ethan picked her up. She was almost too big for this, but not quite yet. He settled her on his hip. "No," he said. "They don't." They rode home in the cab of the tow truck, the sedan behind them, and the whole county probably thinking they'd just watched the dumbest purchase in local history. The car sat in the driveway for the first afternoon because Ethan needed to think before he touched it. He stood at the end of the driveway with a cup of coffee, looking at it, not circling, not examining, just looking, like you let your eyes settle on a painting before you read the placard. Lily brought him a peanut butter sandwich around noon because she'd decided he needed one. He ate it standing there. She sat on the porch steps and watched him. "Is it a mystery?" she asked. "Something like that. Do you know the answer?" "Part of it," he said. "I have to make sure." He started that evening, after dinner, after Lily was in bed. He moved the car into the garage using the handbrake and a come-along winch. The engine wouldn't turn over. The transmission was locked. It took him 20 minutes to get it centered on the garage floor. He set up both work lights. He started with the exterior, but not for the reasons a restorer would. He wasn't looking for damage or assessing what needed replacement. He was reading the car's history through its surface. He cleaned in sections, working methodically from front to back. He used a mild solvent and a soft cloth, not because the surface needed gentle treatment, but because he needed to see. Aggressive cleaning would remove trace evidence. He had learned that in his second year at the auction house, from a man named Warren Hess, who had authenticated 7 pre-war prototypes over his career and never been wrong once. "Clean it like you're trying not to wake someone up," Warren had told him. The rust was surface level in most places, serious in 2 spots along the lower sill, but not structural, not yet. The body panels were heavier gauge than a standard production vehicle of this vintage. That was unusual. He found the first manufacturing mark he was looking for on the driver's side door pillar, hidden behind where a weather-stripping gasket would have sat. It was a small raised numeral, not stamped, but cast into the metal. That was handmade tooling. You didn't do that on a production floor. He stopped. He photographed it with his phone, close-up, with a flashlight at a low angle to throw the relief into contrast. Then he moved to the engine bay. Getting it open took a pry bar and patience. The hood latch had been welded over strange, deliberate, purposeful. Someone had sealed this hood at some point and clearly hadn't expected anyone to open it again. When it finally came up, Ethan stood looking at the engine for a long time. The engine wasn't original to the body. That was immediately obvious. Different mounting configuration, different period. But what sat in the bay wasn't a replacement pulled from a junkyard either. It was too clean for that, even accounting for the years. It had been installed carefully, intentionally. And it was a variant he recognized, a modified displacement version of an engine family he had spent 3 months studying during his 3rd year at the auction house, because they'd had a prototype come through with the same family tree. A development engine, not a production engine. His hands were very still. He spent another hour photographing the engine bay from every angle. Then he went inside, sat at the kitchen table, and opened his laptop. He knew better than to search directly. Public search histories were careless. Instead, He went to a private collector forum he'd registered on years ago and never posted in a forum used mostly by serious authenticators and a few discreet major collectors. He searched the archive for a specific term, the internal project code he believed was connected to what was in his garage. He found 4 posts over a 14-year span. The last one was from 9 years ago. The thread had been started by someone asking whether a rumored prototype from the program had ever surfaced. The consensus was no, it had been assumed scrapped. Ethan sat back in his chair. He could be wrong. The probability was meaningful. The connection could be coincidental borrowed parts, mismatched assembly, nothing more. But the casting marks didn't lie. And the roofline didn't lie. And in his experience, coincidences of this complexity didn't happen. They just looked like coincidences until you knew enough to see them clearly. He closed the laptop and went to bed. He lay in the dark for a while, listening to the house. Then he slept. The forum post appeared 3 days after he'd sent the photographs. He hadn't posted them publicly. He'd sent them privately to a single account, a username he recognized from the archival threads. Someone who demonstrated genuine technical knowledge over years of posts. Someone who had, 9 years ago, written 7 careful paragraphs about why the prototype program in question had likely produced at least 2 physical vehicles before it was shut down. The message came back at 11:40 at night, while Ethan was finishing a brake job on his neighbor's sedan in the garage. He wiped his hands on a shop rag and read it standing under the work light. "I need you to tell me where you got these photographs. I'm not asking about the car itself. I'm asking about these specific photographs. The casting mark on the door pillar, the engine mount configuration. Do you understand what you're showing me?" Ethan typed back, "Yes." The reply came in under 2 minutes. "Then you know that if this is what it appears to be, it's the only surviving physical example of a development program that the company officially stated produced 0 drivable prototypes, which means either their records are wrong, or someone went to considerable trouble to make this car disappear from the record. I've been looking for evidence of this vehicle for 11 years. Please tell me it's real and not a fabrication." Ethan looked around the garage, at the car under the lights, at the open engine bay, at the casting mark he'd photographed 47 times from different angles to make sure the light was right. He typed, "It's real." The reply took longer this time, nearly 4 minutes. "Then you need to be very careful. Not because of anything dramatic, but because there are people who have been looking for this for a long time, and some of them have resources you don't. If you haven't told anyone, don't. Not yet. I need to make some calls." Ethan put the phone face down on the workbench. He looked at the car. He had a rough idea of what it was worth. Not a precise number. Authentication changed everything, and condition was a factor, and the legal history of the vehicle would matter, but a rough idea. The number was not small. It was, in fact, larger than anything Ethan had ever encountered directly in his life. Larger than the house he'd grown up in, larger than every wage he'd earned since he was 18, added together. He didn't feel elated. He felt the way he felt when a diagnosis finally came back clear, not happiness exactly, but the release of tension he hadn't realized he'd been carrying. A settling. He went inside and checked on Lily. She was asleep. Gerald, the one-eyed elephant, was on the floor beside the bed. Ethan picked him up and tucked him back under her arm. She didn't wake. He went to the kitchen and made tea he didn't particularly want, because he needed something to do with his hands. The car was real. That much he was certain of. The authentication would take time, weeks, possibly months, for a full chain of evidence to be established. There would be legal questions about provenance, about the original registration history, about the county impound process. But those were tomorrow's problems. Tonight, the only thing that mattered was this. He had looked at something everyone else had walked past, and he had seen it clearly. The video appeared the same weekend. He found it because a woman he knew vaguely, the mother of one of Lily's classmates, mentioned it at school pickup on Monday. She had a complicated expression. "There's this video going around of a guy at the county salvage lot. I think it might be you." It was him. 43 seconds. Ethan standing beside the rusted sedan while Dale Pruitt performed for the crowd. Laughter. The comment about something dying in the back seat. Ethan's flat, even response. "Drive it." More laughter. The camera panning to show Lily with her hood pulled up. The video had been shared widely in the county's general community page, and then beyond it picked up by a larger page that aggregated clips with the caption, "Man pays $100 for absolute junk at county lot." Some people never learn. The comments, which Ethan did not read past the first line before closing the page, were what you'd expect. Dale Pruitt called him on Wednesday. Ethan answered because he didn't recognize the number. "Listen, I heard you've been working on that car, Dale said. He'd lost some of the showmanship. His voice had a careful quality now. I wanted to reach out, see if maybe you'd want to sell it back. Recoup your 100, maybe a little extra. Goodwill gesture. I'm fine, Ethan said. I could go a couple hundred. Straight cash. I'm not selling it. Silence. Then, what are you planning to do with it? Restore it, Ethan said, which was partly true. Dale made a sound that was not quite a laugh. All right, well, offer stands. Ethan hung up. On Thursday, he noticed a dark gray sedan parked on the street opposite his house. Different spot each time he looked, but always within sight of his driveway. He couldn't see the driver clearly. He mentioned it to no one. He didn't change his routine. He went to his contract jobs, a brake job on the far side of the county, an oil change for the retired couple on Mercer Road who always offered him lunch, and he came home, and he worked on documenting the car in the evenings, and he cooked dinner, and he put Lily to bed, and he sat at the kitchen table afterward in the quiet that follows a child's sleep. The sedan was sometimes there when he checked at 10, sometimes not. He told himself it was probably nothing. He half believed it. There was a strange doubling in those days, the ordinary life running on its ordinary track, and underneath it something else, something he could feel without naming. The weight of a secret that wasn't a secret yet, just a fact that hadn't been confirmed to anyone who mattered. He wasn't afraid. Fear would have required him to believe something bad was coming. He didn't believe that. He just believed something large was coming, and he had learned a long time ago that large things require patience. He took Lily to school. He came home. He documented. At the hardware store on Friday, he ran into a man he knew slightly, a neighbor from 2 streets over named Carl Whitmore, who worked at the county building office and had a habit of being in all the right places to pick up the wrong kind of information. Heard you bought yourself a real prize at the salvage lot, Carl said, with the grin of someone who has heard something funny and is deciding whether to be kind about it. I did, Ethan said. Carl waited for more. Nothing came. You working on it? Carl tried. Yeah. Any luck getting it running? Ethan picked up the bolt he'd come in for a metric hex head he'd measured twice before leaving the house. Working on it, he said. Carl gave up. Well, good luck to you. Ethan paid and left. He took a photo of the license plate and sent it to the forum contact, whose name he'd learned by now was Preston Hale. Preston was a private automotive researcher based out of Oregon. He had no credentials that appeared in any public database, which Ethan had learned meant, in this world, that he was very good at what he did. Preston's reply was quick. Rental car registered to a holding company. Could be nothing. Could be a scout. Don't engage. Don't publicize. How's the documentation coming? Ethan had been photographing everything meticulously. Every casting mark, every manufacturing variance, every component that deviated from production specifications. He'd found 2 more. A steering column that matched a period prototype specification rather than a production one, and a reinforced floor pan design that appeared in no production model documentation he could locate. He'd also found something in the trunk. Under the interior carpeting, mostly disintegrated, was a thin metal plate, bolted to the trunk floor. The bolts had corroded solid, but the plate itself was intact. On it, barely legible under decades of oxidation, was an alphanumeric code stamped in a format he recognized from his time at the auction house, a manufacturer's internal vehicle identification. Not for the public record, for internal tracking only. He photographed it from every angle and sent the images to Preston. Preston took 6 hours to respond. That was the longest he'd ever gone without responding. When the reply came, it was 3 words. It's confirmed. Real. Ethan was sitting at the kitchen table when he read it. Lily was doing a drawing beside him, a horse, she'd said, though it had a number of legs that horses didn't typically have. He put the phone down. He looked at his daughter's drawing. She looked up. You okay, Daddy? Yeah, he said. You made a sound. Did I? Kind of a quiet sound. She studied him for a moment with serious eyes. A good quiet sound or a worried quiet sound? He thought about it. Good, he said. She seemed satisfied with that and went back to her horse. Preston Hale arrived in person 8 days later. He drove a plain white truck with Oregon plates and knocked on Ethan's door at 9 in the morning on a Tuesday, carrying a hard-sided case and a thermos of coffee. He was somewhere in his late 50s, lean, with close-cut gray hair and the careful hands of someone who'd spent decades handling things that mattered. He didn't say much at the door. Just, can I see it? They spent 4 hours in the garage. Preston worked with the focused silence of someone who didn't perform expertise, who simply exercised it. He had brought his own instruments, a fiber optic scope, a spectrometer calibrated for metal alloy analysis, a digital micrometer. He measured the wall thickness of the door panels. He analyzed the alloy composition of the casting marks. He spent 40 minutes on the trunk plate alone. Lily brought them both sandwiches at noon without being asked. Preston thanked her gravely, which she appreciated. When he finished, Preston stood in the middle of the garage and looked at the car for a long time. "I've been in this field for 31 years, he said finally. "I've authenticated 42 significant vehicles. I've also rejected calls on another 60-something that turned out to be fakes or misattributions." He paused. "This is not a fake. This is not a misattribution." Ethan nodded slowly. "The internal code on the trunk plate traces to a development program that ran for approximately 32 months before it was formally closed." Preston continued. "The program officially produced 0 road-ready prototypes. The documentation submitted to close the program stated that all physical test units had been disassembled and scrapped." He looked at Ethan. "They weren't," Ethan said. "At least one wasn't." Preston looked back at the car, which means either the scrapping documentation was falsified, which would have required cooperation at a fairly high level, or this vehicle was removed from the program before the documentation was finalized by someone who had the access and the motive to do so. What would the motive be? Preston was quiet for a moment. This program was shut down because of a corporate acquisition. The acquiring company wanted the program terminated. There was a legal and contractual battle over the intellectual property. If someone inside the original company believed the program was worth preserving, believed the work mattered enough to save at least one physical example of it, they might have found a way to make one vehicle disappear into the private system, not to profit from it, just to preserve it. Ethan thought about that. "What's it worth?" he asked. Preston turned to look at him. There was something careful in his expression, the look of a man measuring how much a number could alter a person. "At auction, with full authentication documentation and clear title, comparable historical prototypes of this significance have sold in the range of $2 to $3 million. This one, given the corporate history and the fact that it's the only surviving unit, could go higher. There would be collectors interested from 5 continents." Ethan stood very still. "Clear title will require legal review of the impound chain," Preston added. "But county impound liquidation has clean legal precedent for transfer of ownership. That shouldn't be an issue." He picked up his thermos. "Mr. Cole," he said, "may I ask how you spotted it? In that lot? In that condition?" Ethan considered the question. "The roofline," he said, "and the stamp on the grill. I'd seen the documentation once, years ago. I didn't go looking for it. I just didn't walk past it when I saw it." Preston looked at him for a moment. Then he gave a small nod, the nod of one person acknowledging another's particular kind of knowledge. "I need to make some calls," he said. "There are people who should know this exists." The SUVs came on a Friday afternoon. There were 3 of them, dark, quiet, moving at a pace that suggested the occupants were in no hurry because they didn't need to be. They parked in a line on the street in front of Ethan's house. Lily was on the porch with a book when they pulled up. She watched them park with genuine interest and zero alarm at 6. 3 large black vehicles were simply interesting. The man who got out of the second vehicle was named William Carver. Ethan knew the name. Most people who'd spent any time in serious automotive history knew it. Carver had founded the development program in question decades ago, an independent engineering venture that had been acquired and ultimately shuttered in a corporate transaction that remained, in certain circles, a subject of ongoing frustration. He was 71 years old now. He had sold 3 successful companies after the acquisition, made a fortune in a way that had nothing to do with automobiles, and had apparently spent a portion of that fortune, over many years, trying to find what he had lost. He walked up the path with the measured steadiness of a man who had learned to economize his physical energy without losing his presence. He was pale, not ill, just the paleness of someone who spent most of their time indoors, in meetings, in offices, in the interiors of things. His hair was white and neatly kept. He wore a plain dark jacket over a blue shirt, no tie. He was holding a photograph. It was an old photograph, the edges worn, the image slightly faded, a picture of a car. The car in Ethan's garage, in what appeared to be a controlled indoor testing environment. The car clean, intact, its original paint still showing. A man in coveralls standing beside it with his hand on the hood. Carver stopped at the edge of the driveway. He looked at the car sitting there, rusted and flat-tired, visibly the same car as in the photograph, and yet so altered by time that only someone who was looking specifically for it would have known. He looked at it for a long time. Then he looked at Ethan. "My name is William Carver," he said. His voice was steady. I believe you have something that used to be mine. I know who you are, Ethan said. The two men looked at each other. Preston Hale called me, Carver said. He told me about you, about where you found it, about how you found it. He paused. I've had people looking for this vehicle for over a decade. I hired 3 separate firms at various points. None of them found it. It was sitting in a county impound lot. It was in the back row, Ethan said. Partially blocked. Yes. Carver looked at the car again. May I see it? They went into the garage. Carver moved slowly around the car, not touching it. He had the photograph in one hand and he held it up occasionally, comparing. His face was difficult to read, something between grief and recognition. The look of someone encountering a thing they had given up expecting to see again. He stopped at the trunk. The plate is there, Ethan said. Carver closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, he crouched down slowly, with the care of a man whose knees had opinions, and looked at the plate without touching it. He stayed crouched for a long time. When he stood, his face had changed. Something had released. The man in this photograph, he said, holding it up, is my chief development engineer. He died in 1998. He's the one who built this car. He's the one who made sure it disappeared from the records rather than let it be scrapped. He looked at Ethan. He never told me. I didn't find out until I started looking, years later, and by then the trail was cold. He folded the photograph carefully and put it in his pocket. Why did he do it? Ethan asked. Carver was quiet for a moment. Because it worked, he said simply. The car worked. The program worked. And the people who shut it down didn't care whether it worked. They cared about the acquisition structure. He didn't want the proof of what we'd built to be destroyed just because it was convenient for a balance sheet. He looked at Ethan. He preserved something real, Carver said, even though no one was watching and no one would know. The garage was quiet. Lily appeared in the doorway from the house. She looked at Carver, then at her father. Carver noticed her and gave her a slight nod, the formal, unpatronizing acknowledgement of an older person who takes children seriously. She came and stood beside Ethan. Is he a good person? She whispered. Ethan looked at Carver. Yeah, he said. I think so. By the following week, the story had moved through the world of serious collectors the way major discoveries do, quickly among the people who mattered, barely at all among the people who didn't. Preston had been methodical about who he contacted and in what order. He started with 2 authenticators whose opinions carried institutional weight, then moved to a small number of major collectors who were known for discretion. He did not post publicly. He did not issue statements. He moved through quiet channels the way that people who understand value always move, without noise, without performance. The community's response, as relayed through Preston, was something close to stunned. Several people had believed the program had produced no surviving examples. The discovery overturned a consensus that had been in place for over a decade. One man, a collector in Switzerland, who had spent a reported sum in the high 6 figures investigating the program years earlier, sent Preston a single-line message: I need to come see it. Preston told him politely that he'd have to wait for the authentication process to complete. The authentication itself was already in motion. The spectrometer data had gone to an independent laboratory. The casting mark photographs had been reviewed by a retired metallurgist who had worked in automotive manufacturing for 30 years and had contributed to several landmark authentications. His preliminary conclusion, as shared with Preston: the marks are genuine. The alloy composition is period consistent. I'd need physical access to issue a formal opinion, but the photographic evidence is not consistent with fabrication. Physical access was arranged. He came on a Thursday. His name was Jerome Calloway, and he was 64, semi-retired, and had the particular kind of authority that comes from knowing you're one of very few people in the world who can do something correctly. He spent 6 hours with the vehicle. He left without saying much. His written conclusion arrived 4 days later, 14 pages, footnoted, with a final section that read, in part, in my professional judgment, the vehicle under examination represents a genuine surviving unit from the development program in question. The physical evidence is consistent with the internal documentation recovered from archival sources and is not consistent with any known method of fraudulent fabrication. Dale Pruitt heard about it from a buyer he knew who had connections to the collector community. He called Ethan again. This time the call was shorter. I heard Dale started. Yeah, Ethan said. Look, I had no way of knowing. Nobody did, Ethan said. It wasn't generous, exactly. It was accurate. Nobody at the lot that day had known what they were looking at. That was the point. Is there anything I can? No, Ethan said. We're fine. He hung up. Preston Hale had initiated the authentication process formally. The documentation chain was being assembled. The manufacturing records recovered from archival sources, the spectrometer analysis, the trunk plate code traced to the internal program records, the engineering specifications cross-referenced against the physical vehicle. It would take months. In the meantime, William Carver had made a proposal. He wanted to fund the full restoration of the vehicle, a meticulous, historically accurate restoration to match the specifications it had when the photograph was taken. He had a facility and a team that did this work. He wanted the car to end in a foundation he was establishing in memory of his chief engineer, a physical museum of development-era automotive history, the kind that existed in no institutional collection. In return, he was prepared to pay Ethan for the vehicle at a figure that Preston had determined was at the low end of authenticated fair market value. Not the auction peak. Carver wasn't interested in auctions. He wanted the car to go somewhere specific, to serve something specific. The number was still larger than anything Ethan had encountered in his life. He'd sat with it for 2 days before he answered. On the third day, he called Carver. "I have one condition," Ethan said. "Namit, there's a photograph I'd like a copy of. The one of the man who built it." Carver was quiet for a moment. "I'll have it framed," he said. The legal process moved carefully and, by the standards of such things, relatively smoothly. The county impound purchase gave Ethan clean title. Carver's legal team had expected complications. There were none. Ethan's own lawyer, a woman named Patricia Drummond, whom he'd found through a referral and who turned out to be precisely as good as advertised, reviewed everything twice. The transfer completed on a Tuesday morning. Ethan signed the documents at a table in Patricia's office. When it was done, she slid an envelope across the table. He didn't open it there. He thanked her, put it in his jacket pocket, and drove home. He picked Lily up from school. She got in the truck with her backpack and immediately started telling him about something that had happened at lunch involving a bird and a sandwich. He listened to the whole thing carefully, asking questions at the right moments. When they pulled into the driveway, the space where the car had been was empty. Carver's transport team had come for it 2 days earlier. "It's gone," Lily observed, looking at the empty space. "Yeah." She thought about this. "Is that okay?" Ethan looked at the empty driveway for a moment. "It went where it was supposed to go," he said. "That's okay." He paid the back rent first. He called his landlord, a man named Douglas Wheatley, who had been patient in ways he didn't have to be, and asked if he could stop by. He showed up at Douglas's door with a check, and Douglas looked at it for a long moment and then looked at Ethan and said, "You sure?" And Ethan said yes. The credit card came next. Then a set aside for Lily, not in her name, not accessible, not touching. Something that would be there when she needed it. For school. For whatever came after school. For the things he hadn't been able to promise her before. He put a portion in an account in Sandra's name, not hers anymore. Not legally, but in a way that mattered to him. A small foundation, more name than structure. Directed toward leukemia research, not because it would change anything in the immediate world. Because it was the right shape for his gratitude, the right direction for grief when grief needed somewhere to go. He thought about what Carver had said about his engineer. He preserved something real, even though no one was watching and no one would know. Ethan understood that. The photograph arrived 2 weeks after the transfer, as promised, framed simply dark wood, clean glass. The engineer standing beside the car in the test facility. He looked like a man who believed in what he was doing. Ethan put it on the mantel. On the left side, Sandra's photo on the right. He stood back and looked at both of them. Then he went to the kitchen to make dinner. It was a Wednesday. Lily had homework, a worksheet on patterns that she'd already half completed in the truck on the way home, which was technically against the rules he'd tried to establish, but which he let go because she'd been so focused doing it. He made pasta. Simple, fast. The kind of meal where nothing was trying too hard to be anything other than dinner. Lily sat at the kitchen table and finished her worksheet and then drew on the back of it another horse, this one with a more accurate number of legs. Progress. When the food was ready, she climbed into her chair and waited while he served both plates. "Are we different now?" she asked. He set down the serving spoon and looked at her. It was a 6-year-old's version of a real question. Children ask the questions adults circle around, usually more directly and usually better. "Different how?" he said. She considered. "Like, is everything different now?" "Some things are different," he said. "The worried stuff is less. We have more room." He thought about how to say the next part. "But the important stuff is the same." She thought about that. "Gerald's the same," she said. "Yes. And you're the same." "Yes." "Okay," she said, apparently satisfied. She picked up her fork. He sat down across from her. Through the kitchen window, the late evening light was coming in at a low angle, the way spring light does, long and amber, finding the edges of things. It touched the counter, the wall, the side of Lily's face as she bent over her plate. Ethan looked at his daughter. He thought about the car, about the man who had built it and hidden it and never told anyone, who had looked at something real and decided it was worth preserving even when no one was watching, about Dale Pruitt laughing in the lot, about Lily's hand in his, small and certain, about the photograph on the mantel and the empty space in the driveway. He picked up his fork. He ate. Outside, the neighborhood settled into its ordinary evening. A dog barking somewhere down the block, the sound of a lawnmower, a car passing, ordinary sounds, unremarkable, the world going about its business with no awareness of what had moved through it. Inside, a man and his daughter ate pasta in a quiet kitchen. The light came through the window. The horse on the back of the worksheet watched from the table. Gerald, the elephant, was upstairs on the bed, waiting for bedtime in the patient way of things that know they're needed. In the morning, Ethan would drive his truck, still the same truck, the one that ran and passed inspection and got them where they needed to go, to a job on the far side of the county. A brake job for a woman named Ruth Calloway, who drove a 2007 Honda and had been a loyal customer for 2 years. He would work carefully, as he always did, checking everything twice. He would charge her the same rate he'd always charged. He would drive home in time to pick up Lily from school. The money was real. The security was real. The fact of a future that had room in it that was real too, and newer than the rest. And he was still getting used to it, the way you get used to a house that finally has proper heat after years of compensating. You stop bracing for the cold. It takes time to stop bracing. But the man doing those things, the man driving the truck, working the job, picking up his daughter, was the same man who had stood in a salvage lot and crouched beside a rusted car and seen something that everyone else had walked past. That had always been true. It was just more visible now. And Ethan Cole, who had never needed the world to see him clearly in order to see the world clearly himself, ate his pasta, listened to his daughter talk, and let the evening be what it was. Because some things don't need to be said. Some things just need to be true. It wasn't the car that changed his life. It was the way he'd learned to see, to stop in front of what the world had already walked past, to look a second longer than anyone else thought was worth it. That was the thing no one had ever laughed at, because no one had ever seen it.